come and couldn't record it, particularly somebody in Australia who said that the time wasn't very convenient for them.
I don't know, 3 o'clock in the
It's the
morning.
middle of the night there.
Okay, so we'll put everybody on mute and we'll start. And whoever turns up now turns up, okay? Okay, everybody's now muted except for me. Yay, and Steve. So welcome everybody to this presentation. It's lovely to see so many of you. For those of you who are not used to our HOB Hitachut Olei Britannia presentations, you should know that we're a group of Brits who live in Israel and have some fun times together. We also invited to this presentation 2 other groups of people. We invited some people who were in orphan with us in 1978. And that's why we have people here from Winnipeg and from California and from New Mexico and from Cedar. I said New Mexico.
Oh, okay.
And we also invited our group that we travel with, and some of them are here. That's Jill and David, they're in Jerusalem, and Lauren, who's also in Jerusalem, and Yona, who's in Shoresh, and Judy Brown, who is in Jerusalem. Okay, so we've got an interesting collection of people here, and we hope that you're all going to enjoy the presentation. Before we actually start the presentation, I just want to tell those of you who are in Israel what our next function is, and that is on July the 8th. We will be having, for the first time since March 2020, we will be having an in-person meeting, not Zoom. We're having a cheese and wine garden, yay! A cheese and wine garden party. That's on July the 8th. We want to see as many of you as possible there. Okay, so let's start our presentation. Before we start showing the screen, I want to show you an item that we brought back with us as a souvenir from Ethiopia. Okay, it's wood. I'm turning it around so that you can see. Oh, where have you gone? What kind of thing it is, and your how do you say in English? Your assignment is at the end of the presentation to tell us what it is. Okay, this doesn't count for those people who actually were in Ethiopia with us. Okay, that's not for you. So there it is. Okay, so let's share screen, and we'll start our presentation of our trip to Ethiopia in 2012. This photograph is a photograph of the group standing at the Lalibela airport, which is where we started our trip. An adventure in the footsteps of Ethiopian Jews with 16 trekkers. Here are the dates. It was in 2012. Now, marked here on the picture, you can see Steve. Oh, that's not right.
Well, hang on, let me finish this. Let go.
You can see Steve. You can also see, where are we? Here's Steve. And there is me. You can also see Judy, who's here with us this evening, and Yona, who's here with us this evening, and Jill, the back here with us this evening. You also see Mark, this gentleman, Micha Feldman. He was our guide in Ethiopia. And you also see this young lady, I can't pronounce her name. We called her Firehiwot, who we took with us on the trip as a witness. Now, when we started putting this talk together, we realized that what we have here is actually 4 different stories. We have, of course, the story of the trip, but we also have the trekker story, the story of this group of friends who've been traveling together for quite some time. We also have Micha's story, the story of the guide, and also Frey's story, the story of our Ethiopian witness. So let's start with the trekker story. The trekker story starts in 2004. In 2004, we joined a group of friends, or people who became friends, on a trip to Poland. It was all people like us, English-speaking immigrants who'd been in Israel a long time, with Sabra children, who'd sent their children on the trip to Poland. And we decided that we wanted to do it too. So a group of friends got together for a trip to Poland. It was a very moving, incredible experience, as these things usually are. Here is a photograph of us at Auschwitz. That's this photograph here. And we took with us, as is usual for these trips, a witness. This is the man who came with us to Poland, Jackie Handeli, recently deceased. He was originally from Saloniki and was sent to Auschwitz at the age of 12 with all his family. He was the only one of his family who survived, and he came with us and was our witness for this trip. Like, I'm afraid my granddaughter's just appeared.
No, you can't touch camera, you can't.
Anyway, after the trip, we understood that what we had was something very special, that the group gelled extremely well. And we decided that we would continue to travel together every time in the footsteps of the Jews of somewhere else, every couple of years. And that's what happened. So in 2007, we went to Greece. Here's a photograph of the group in Saloniki. No, this photograph actually is in Delphi. But we took Jackie with us, and he guided us in Athens and also in Saloniki. And that was 2007. 2009, we went to Holland. This lady here, who was also with us in Ethiopia, there's her husband, can't see her. Okay, this lady here is Dutch. Her parents had been hidden during the war, and she organized a trip to Holland where we learned about the stories of the Jews of Holland, and we visited the places where her parents had been hidden and met the family of the people who had hidden them. And that was the next trip. And then in 2012, we went to Ethiopia, which you're going to hear about now. And also we went to Russia. Here's the group of us in the Red Square. Oh, this is the photograph was taken in Holland. This was taken at the Van Gogh Museum in Holland. And of course, this photograph was taken in Ethiopia. And here's our witness. So these are the two witnesses that we've taken with us on our trips. So that's the story of the trekkers. Now let's carry on to the story of the Ethiopian trip. So we left Ben Gurion, and it was a 4-hour flight to Addis Ababa. And then we took a local plane, 1 hour to Lalibela, which is where we started our trip. As you can see, it's more or less due south. It's in the same time zone as Israel. Here is a more detailed map. Here is Ethiopia. So we landed in Addis Ababa and then flew to Lalibela. Lalibela, thank you. The blue mark here is the route that we took on the trip. So we spent 7 days in the Gondar province, which is in the north, which is most of the Jewish area. And have a look and you'll see how close the Sudanese border is to where the Jewish area is. That's actually a very important part of the story of the Ethiopian Jews. We spent 7 days in the north, flew back to Addis, and then some of the people in the group went home, and some of us carried on for another 6 days in the southern part, which really concentrated on the tribal story. But we won't go there today. Today we're just talking about the Jewish bit of the trip, on the bit that took the first 7 days. This is the bus route that we took. You can see we drove from Lalibela to Gondar, which was the center of Jewish life. Lalibela, where are we? To Gondar. Here's Gondar. We'll visit Woleka, which is a Falasha village. The word Falasha is a derogatory Amharic word for Jews. It means outsider or exile. A better name, of course, the name we use for Jews is the Beta Israel. Of course, you will also have heard of the Falashmura. Those were the Jews who converted to Christianity during the 19th and 20th centuries. And then, okay, so after we visited that part, we drove further north up into the Simeon Mountains. And then we drove back to Kola Diba, which is part of Frey's story. That's where we'll hear the story of Frey. We then drove further south to Bahir Dar. And from there we flew to Addis Ababa. Now, Gondar province was an independent Jewish kingdom from the 9th to the 13th centuries and was mentioned by Benjamin of Tudela in the 12th century and also by Marco Polo in the 13th century. Okay, so now let's hear Micha's story. Micha Feldman was our guide for this trip. He was the son of Holocaust survivors, and he dedicated his life to working with immigrants and helping immigrants, specifically the Ethiopian community. He worked for the Jewish Agency in the 70s and 80s to free the Ethiopian Jews from the shocking conditions as thousands left their villages in northern Ethiopia to trek for weeks to the squalid refugee camps in Sudan. Over 4,000 of them died of disease and malnutrition on the way and in the camps. And at the time, the Mossad was taking Jews out by boat from the Red Sea diving resort. So you'll hear more about that a bit later. In 1990, he went to Addis Ababa as the Jewish Agency's representative and Israeli consul, and he oversaw the immigration of over 14,000 Jews in the dramatic two-day Operation Solomon in May 1991. You can read his book, On Wings of Eagles. It's an account of his Ethiopian story, and it's available on Amazon, On Wings of Eagles by Micha Feldman. So the fact that we had with us somebody with such a rich history of being in Ethiopia, fluent Amharic speaker. He claims to know every Ethiopian in Israel. I wouldn't be surprised if that were true, but that was really added value to the trip. So we started our trip in Lalibela, and this is Lalibela. By the way, the photographs were all taken by Steve. So I think they're pretty good. And also, by the way, if anybody's got any questions, you can unmute yourselves and ask a question. If not, that's not a problem. Okay, so Lalibela. Lalibela was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978. It's 2,500 meters above sea level, and it's one of Ethiopia's holiest cities with these churches carved out of the bedrock. They were done between the 7th and the 13th centuries, and they are, as you can see, I think from the pictures, just mind-boggling. Have a look at this one here. And as you can see, that's an entrance, that's one you can go into. And here is a picture of us going into that particular church. What's with the shoes? Those of you who are in Ethiopia remember the shoe story. You mustn't wear shoes going into the church, so we had to take our shoes off and leave them outside, but we had to leave the church from a different door. When we left the church on the other side of the building, our shoes were all there, and there were 2 or 3 people who knew exactly which shoes belonged to exactly which tourist, which is really quite an amazing thing. In Britain, we would call it a job creation scheme. But in any case, that's why there is pictures of the shoes and me with the shoes. So here's photographs inside the church. Here are more photographs. As you can see, the people in the church are wearing white robes. This is their, I don't know, their Sabbath finery, but when they go to church, they wear the white robes. And in fact, the Ethiopian Jews here wear the white robes. And we saw it a lot in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian church considers the Old Testament as important as the New. The motif in the picture here is actually a Magen David. It's not just a 6-pointed star. Here is a photograph of Micha practicing his fluent Amharic with some of the locals. Okay, so next morning.
Sorry, I had a question about the previous slide. Was that a cross inside the Magen David?
Hold on, let's go back.
In the center there. It looked, or is that just a shape?
It probably is. As Ellie said, they consider the 2 testaments as unequal weighting. It's not like in the European churches where the New Testament replaced the Old Testament. There they consider both of equal standing. So it might very well be a cross.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So here's a photograph of us in the hotel the next morning having breakfast before starting the long drive to Gondar city. The food was Ethiopian and kosher. This here is injera bread. This is the basic staple food in Ethiopia. It's bread made from teff flour. We ate an awful lot of tilapia fish. We ate a lot of injera. We ate a lot of cooked vegetables, no raw vegetables. Micha has established a chain of hotels where he takes his groups, where he has locked rooms with kosher equipment. And he also has a young woman who he has trained in the laws of kashrut. So his groups are all Shomrei Shabbat and kosher. That was not an issue at all. Look at the cup in the top right-hand corner. It's got a lovely little Wysotsky tea bag in it, but it's a very, very typical Ethiopian motif, presumably the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. But that's the kind of motifs you see a lot in Ethiopia. So we start our long drive from Lalibela to Gondar city. The drive to Gondar was spectacular. The view seemed to go on forever. As you can see, it's very green. You know, people in Israel, we said, oh, we're going to Ethiopia. It was September. Oh, it'll be so hot there. But actually, it was very temperate and wet. It was wet and very, very green, as you can see. We stopped on the way at a typical homestead. Here you can see the wife grinding the seeds for the teff flour to make the injera. This is a very typical scene, the chickens and the whatever the animal is.
Dog.
Oh, it's a dog. There you go. Just so you know, this was the grandmother of the particular homestead we stopped at. She is not yet 60. So it gives you an idea of the kind of life these people lead. We passed lots of these isolated homesteads on the way to Gondar. That particular day was a festival. At many places on the way, there were groups of young girls dancing and singing and all wearing grass skirts. There were very, very few vehicles, people walking everywhere. The kids were out of school for the festival, and so they were busy on the roads. And as you can see here, these girls dancing at the side of the road. This seems to be some kind of phenomenon we saw a lot in Ethiopia, people dancing at the side of the roads, waving as you went by, but very, very few vehicles in any case. So we arrived in Gondar at the end of the second day. Gondar is the main city in the north. It was founded in 1635 and was the capital for many years. In the center is Fasil Gebi, this fortress here. It was built in the 17th century, and we actually went touring in the fortress there on Shabbat. Addis Ababa, which means new flower, was built in 1886 to be the capital. It's in the exactly in the center of the country.
Deliberately.
Yeah.
They wanted it to be exactly in the center.
Right. Okay, so the next day, we started touring a few miles out of Gondar at the point on the road where the Jews started their trek to Sudan. An estimated 4,000 died on the way to the refugee camps. They were taken from there to Israel, first from the Red Sea diving resort, and then in Operation Moses. This young lady here is a member of Knesset, Penina Tamano-Shata. She is now Israel's Minister for Aliyah and Integration, and she crossed into Sudan from this point when she was 3 years old. She is a member of Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party. She was the Minister for Aliyah in the last government, and now she is again in this new government. So of course, I guess you may have seen the very poor film about the Red Sea diving resort. In the early 1970s, Italians set up a diving resort village in Sudan, which actually failed miserably. But in 1979, Mossad agents posing as Swiss entrepreneurs leased the resort for $320,000. They ran it as a genuine diving resort with many European paying guests, including a team of elite British commandos, apparently. But at night, groups of Ethiopian Jews left the refugee camps and were taken by truck 600 miles over the desert tracks to the resort. And from there, they were transferred onto Zodiac rubber dinghies. Israeli naval commandos then took them at high speed to the Israeli mothership, waiting outside Sudan's territorial waters. Around 12,000 Ethiopian Jews left from the resort, but then the cover was blown and an emergency airlift brought another 8,000 in Operation Moses in 1984. So on to Wallaka, which had
Can I jump in again?
Yes.
I just would like to recommend the book, which the movie was fun, it was Hollywoodized. The book, Red Sea Spies by Rafi Berg, is fantastic.
Oh, great. Can you put it in the chat so that anybody put the name of the book and the writer?
Will do.
Thank you, Caroline. Great, thank you. Okay, so then on to Wallaka. Wallaka had been a Jewish village in the Gondar region. No Jews living there now, of course, but it's been kept as one of the Jewish villages that tourists like us can go and visit. As you can see, it was a very wet and muddy day that day. Here am I in all my mud. And here we are with one of our members blowing a shofar. We were there just before Rosh Hashanah, so we actually had a shofar blowing every day. And he decided to blow it in Wallaka. Here are the two shuls. You know, every Jewish place has got at least two shuls. These were actually the shuls. Nothing else remains there. Here's a photograph of Micha talking to us about the shuls there. This photograph here is actually the roof. Although you can see it's corrugated iron on the roof, under the iron there was actually a wooden ceiling, like in all the huts in Ethiopia.
I might mention this behind on the floor, these white, muddy sacks are actually where people sat. So people sat, as in the Sephardi tradition, they sat around the outside and not formal seating.
Okay, this is a Jewish cemetery. It's behind the village. Because of the rain and the mud, we were unable to get across to actually go visit it. But as you can see here, the blue things, those are the actual graves there, and there's some graves and here. And here is a plaque which shows that it is the Jewish cemetery. After visiting the village, we returned to Gondar. And in Gondar, we went to the Jewish agency compound, where at that time, the Ethiopians were waiting to receive permission to make aliyah to Israel. Here they spend most of their days learning about Israel and waiting to emigrate. First, we met some of the children at the school there and the young Israeli volunteers teaching them. This man here was a rabbi who had gone to Israel to get ordination and then came back to work with the community at the Jewish agency compound. He served as a translator for us, in addition to Micha, of course. At that time, there were about 3,000 Jews. They were thought to be the last Jews who would emigrate, but of course, there's always going to be more. Now, there are about 9,000 waiting, but mainly in Addis Ababa, and mainly Falash Mora, those who'd converted to Christianity in the late 19th century, when the authorities told them that there were no Jewish people left anywhere in the world, and if they converted, they would receive land. Now, many of them wish to revert back to being Jewish, and they have to go through full conversion. So here's some more pictures of our time in the Jewish agency compound. Sherman, one of the people in our group, is a science educator, and he brought with him some science experiments to entertain the children with. That's what's happening in these pictures here. Children are learning to read and write in both Amharic and Ivrit. Here's an exercise book, Ivrit and Amharic. Here's their notice board with Ivrit and Amharic. We split up into different age groups to learn about each other. Here you can see, here you can see me trying to learn how to do an Ethiopian dance. Here you can see Frey talking to the kids who are fascinated to meet a young Ethiopian who's actually made it to Israel. That's what I just said. Here you can see how fascinated they were. Absolutely, just the idea that here's somebody who's actually done something that they want to do, that they're hoping to do, was just amazing for them. Younger ones taught us Ethiopian dances. And here's Judy, who's here this evening, teaching them the hora. Thanks, Judy. This is the dining room. There were free meals once a day for all the mothers and the young children. And finally to the kindergarten. Here you can see in the kindergarten with the Israeli volunteers working with the kids. Jews were living around the Jewish agency compound, obviously in very poor conditions. Some of them been there for many years. Here you see on the wall photographs of their family who've made it to Israel. Here's the kitchen. This gives you an idea of how poor the living conditions are there. They supported themselves by weaving and primitive metalwork. Traditional Ethiopian Jewish trades. Here they're making scythes. Here's the talitot. Apparently, this upturned beer can is a sign of the world's oldest profession, but I'm not quite sure why we left that in the presentation. Let's go on to the next photograph. Kabbalat Shabbat, we were there on a Friday. Kabbalat Shabbat for the youngsters, led by the Israeli volunteers, with us singing with gusto. Look at that, there's us singing with gusto, trying to get into the mood. It wasn't yet dark, but the adults held their Friday night service early to make sure that they could return safely to their homes before sundown. Here's the mechitza. And here, as you can see, they're all in their lovely white Shabbos finery. We went back to the hotel for Shabbat. These photographs were taken on Motzei Shabbat. Here is a typical Ethiopian meal. Here's again the injera bread. Here's a plate of typical food. It's basically the injera bread and lots of different vegetables. There was the buffet. And here we are toasting our Motzei Shabbat meal. This is Micha, and this is the young lady who came with and did all the cooking for the group. Okay, so the following day, Sunday, we drove up north towards the Simeon Mountains, passing many, many churches along the way. Again, you can see all their Sabbath finery. Here's more pictures, very misty. You can see it's very misty and very green. They're all happy to be photographed. And we drove up into the Simeon Mountains. We actually went to the highest lodge in Africa, 3,260 meters. We saw the famous Simeon baboons. We were surprised to see an electronic stock market ticker in the village going up to the mountains. And here you can see us, and you can see how misty it was. We were high up, it was chilly. And then all of a sudden, out of the mist comes a shuk, a market, a load of people with their wares, and they put all this stuff out just for us to buy, which of course we had to, gourds and basketware and other trinkets like that. It was just quite an amazing scene, a market coming out of the mist. So that was our day in the Simeon Mountains. The day after the Simeon Mountains, we set off south from Gondar to Kola and drove to Kola Diba. And this is where we started Frey's story. Frey was born in 1993 in the village of Kola Diba. Her parents divorced when she was a few months old. She and her mother then moved to family in Addis Ababa. When she was 5, her mother died and she returned to the father in Kola Diba. When she was 8, her father died and she then went back to her grandparents in Addis Ababa to await aliyah. When she was 10, her grandparents received permission to move to Israel, but she did not. She had to stay on in Addis, and she stayed on with her mother's sister, her aunt. Finally, when she was 12, she received permission and moved to Israel. When she joined our trip, she was just towards the end of her army service. She served in the Israeli military police. She went on to university. She's now married. She has a child. And that is Frey's story. Really a very, very heart-rending story. We went to Kola Diba with her, where she lived with her father until he died when she was 8. And there we met her aunt, her father's sister, and many of cousins. To be present at this coming together was really quite an amazing experience. Here you can see them holding hands. We went to the aunt's home. This is where she lived until she was 8 years old. She later told us that she would never have been able to make this visit without us. If she had been alone, she would not have been allowed to leave. But because she was with white people, she was protected. This really obviously quite shocked us. It's not something we expected here, but we understood that taking her with us on the trip was a real win-win situation. I mean, for us, it just made the trip so much more personal and so much more able to understand something about the experience of these people. And for her, it gave her an opportunity that she literally thought she would never have. So it was a win-win all round, I think. We then went on to say a prayer at her father's grave. Again, she said she never dreamt that she would ever be able to visit her father's grave. And here she is saying some prayers, whatever, at the grave. So that was the the trip with Frey. We spent that night in Bahir Dar at the southern.
Ellie?
Yes.
Ellie,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Can you just go back to Frey a minute?
Yes.
I didn't quite understand who was it who would have stopped her from leaving if she'd been on her own?
Her family.
Her family. Oh, I see. Just
Yes.
that her family would have begged her to stay.
Yes.
They wouldn't have begged her, they would have forced her to
Forced her
stay.
to
They would
stay.
have kidnapped her
They
effectively
would have.
and married her off.
Okay. That's what I wanted to understand. It wasn't clear.
That's what we
Thank you.
understood from her anyway.
Yes. Yeah. There's one other fact that we actually haven't mentioned, that this is her father's family. And her father wasn't Jewish. So this is not a Jewish family. Whether that's of any relevance, I don't actually know. But that's the story. Okay.
Ellie,
Yes.
I have a question as
Yes.
well with Frey. So of her family members that are still in Ethiopia, are any of them waiting to make aliyah?
No, because that's her father's family and they're not Jewish.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. So all of her, on her mother's side, all
They all
of them
came
have
to
been
Israel.
able
As far as-
Oh,
to.
we'll see
Oh.
later.
No, but that's her father's side as well. Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. As far as we know, her mother's side all came to Israel. Her parents were divorced. Her parents was divorced when she was a tiny baby. And the only reason she went
Right.
back to the father was because her mother died. Yeah.
That's the Antinab side, is the mother's side.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay. That night we spent in Bahir Dar, which is at the southern tip of Lake Tana. Lake Tana, which is a rather large lake, as you can see, a very beautiful one. These
I think
photographs
it's the second largest lake in Africa. I
after
believe.
Victoria,
Yeah.
probably, yes. These photographs are just photographs taken from the hotel. It's just interesting to see the scaffolding and the building. And this photograph here is inside this building site where there's a woman carrying a sack of concrete. And I just think that this is a very typical African scene because we only saw women schlepping. All the schlepping was done by women. So,
And you can see the.
let's go back. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And just you can see this in this building that the pigumim, the scaffolding is all just pieces of wood. You wonder how safe it is.
It's very primitive building
primitive.
methods, so we said. Okay, on to the next day, day 7, our last day in the north, and out on Lake Tana, the largest lake in Ethiopia with 21 islands. Note how brown the water is. The lake and the rivers are all very brown. This is because of the clay particles, apparently. There are monasteries on 8 of the islands. And in the monasteries, all the walls are covered in Old and New Testament paintings. We visited one of the monasteries. Here you can see St. George and the dragon. Note this. This is the Ark, the Aron HaKodesh. There are over 3,000 monasteries in Ethiopia, and they all have an Ark. And they all claim to have the original tablets with the 10 Commandments, brought to Ethiopia by Menelik, the son of King Solomon, and Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. They told us that only one of the monasteries actually has the original, and the others are all there to fool the thieves.
But no one is allowed to go into them except for the priest in charge. And these walls, it's not just some of the walls are covered in these magnificent frescoes. Every inch of the place is just covered. Apparently they're all like this.
It's really quite magnificent to see. Okay, close to Bahir Dar, Lake Tana flows south out to the Blue Nile Falls. From there, the Blue Nile runs down to merge with the White Nile at Khartoum before carrying on north through Egypt. So these are the Blue Nile Falls. They're really very, very spectacular. Again, they're brown. The water is brown because of the clay. In the evening, we flew from Bahir Dar to Addis Ababa for the next stage in Frey's story. Frey's parents separated shortly after she was born, and she lived with her mother. As we've told you before, when Frey was 5, her mother died from sepsis following an insect bite. She's buried in the Jewish cemetery in Addis, and we went there to meet Frey's aunt, right, her mother's sister. It is her mother's sister, yeah?
Yes.
Her mother's sister, and to visit her grave. After her grandmother made aliyah, she stayed there with this aunt. The aunt still lives in Addis, and she met us at the Jewish cemetery, and we went to the grave. This, of course, was the first time she'd ever been able to visit her mother's grave. We recited psalms at the grave. Here's Micha, he sang El Melech Hamim. And again, she said to us, she just never dreamt that this would be an opportunity that she would have to visit her mother's grave. During a short stop at the National Museum, we met several hominid specimens, including the famous Lucy. Lucy is a skeleton of a female of the species
Australopithecus afarensis.
Yeah, dated to 3.2 million years ago, discovered in 1974. She was quite famous, but there's others who've superseded her now as being even older. But it was just, you can't go to Addis without visiting Lucy. We then went to the Israeli embassy, where of course we were not allowed to photograph inside, but we did meet with the ambassador, toured the grounds, including the collection point for Operation Solomon. This is the woman who was the ambassador at the time that we were there, Zavadia Balianish. This was one of the huge advantages to having made this trip with Micha Feldman, because of who he is. We were able to go into the embassy. We had I don't think audiences as well. We had a meeting with the ambassador. And in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, Jill, if you're still with us, were you not in Orphan with her husband? I think that's
yes, I was in Orphan with her husband.
Right.
And he was an engineer, but he was staying at home to take care of the children because one of their children, maybe two, had some severe problems.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
okay.
So, and the other thing I want to tell to the group, and then I'll mute myself, is when we were on the grounds and having Micha tell us about Operation Solomon, I tell people when I talk about this trip, it's like being at Valley Forge and having George Washington give you the tour.
Thank you for that, Jill.
Because that it is parallel.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes.
We should think of a British parallel for that. I'm sure there must be one. Okay, thanks, Jill. Okay, so at the time, the foreign minister was Avigdor Lieberman. Today, he is actually our finance minister, has been for the last week. And he initiated a policy that where possible, ambassadors should be native to the country they served in. That's one of the reasons that Daniel Taub was the ambassador to the UK and Michael Oren was the ambassador to the US. She Belianish, whatever her name is, was born to a Jewish family in Gondar, and she immigrated to Israel in 1984 at the age of 17 during Operation Moses. She told us that she enjoyed being the only female ambassador in Ethiopia because it's a very patriarchal place. So while we were in the grounds of the Israeli embassy, Micha told us the story of Operation Solomon in 1991. Talk about from the horse's mouth, he was in charge of it. So at the time, the country was ruled by Mengistu, who was the president of Ethiopia from 77 to 91, when his regime came to a very bloody end in a civil war that caused the death of up to 750,000 people. Towards the end, Israel sold weapons to Mengistu in exchange for the release of the Jews. A few days before the Mengistu regime collapsed, Israel flew in 35 stripped down planes and took out 14,325 Jews in 36 hours. One of the aircraft, an El Al 747, carried at least 1,088 people, including 2 babies who were born on the flight, and holds the world record for the most passengers on an aircraft. Micha was responsible for the ground operation in Addis, organising gathering of the people from around the country, and all in the midst of the war. You can imagine, well, you can't really imagine.
Yeah. The surrounding forces were about 10 miles outside of Addis. And it fell only a day or two later.
Yeah, and they had to get the Jews out very quickly. So here's some photographs. Here's a photo. Steve didn't take this photograph, by the way. Here's a photograph of inside the aeroplane. Of course, they removed all the chairs. Not much social distancing there.
And anyone who complains about EasyJet.
Yeah, right. So here's a photograph actually in the compound waiting to be taken to the airport. Here's soldiers giving them food, drink. And this photograph, we believe, was taken landing in Israel, we think, but we're not actually very sure. These are the photographs we have of that event. So from Addis, we traveled south for 6 amazing days, visiting many tribes, all with very different customs and dress and many animals. But that's a story for another day. Although I will point out here, we visited the Rastafarians in Shashimene. They believe that Emperor Haile Selassie is still alive and is the second coming. Here's Steve and I enjoying our trip on a brown river in a hollowed out tree trunk boat. And here is the item that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. Does anybody have any idea what it might be? Unmute yourself and tell us if you do.
I thought it looked like something to put your leg up on.
Okay.
Is it a headrest or is it a stool?
Okay. Yeah, you can't see. Yes, you're right. It's a stool. It's a stool and a headrest. You can lie on it with your head on it, or you can sit on it, but it's only used by men. Women don't have it at all. It's only for men. And I claim it's because women in Ethiopia don't have time to sit down. So that's that.
We should show it again when we go.
I'll show it again
after
when we've got a bigger
presentation.
screen. Right, yeah, okay. So basically that's it. That's the end of the presentation. This photograph was taken on our last day of the group with Micha and with Frey. And there's one other interesting little coda to the story, and that's this gentleman here. Now, he was our guide on the southern part of the trip. His name was Gatacho, but we found it very difficult to say, so we called him Gazpacho, but he didn't seem to mind. And he specialized in guiding Israeli groups for some reason. And once when he was in Israel for work, he met and fell in love with an Israeli girl, and he is married, and he now lives in Israel, lives in the north, and he, well, up until Corona, makes his living taking Jewish groups to Ethiopia. So that's Gatacho. So that was
he'd just set up in Ethiopia the vehicles he needed for traveling around, taking groups around, and then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And of course he's been stuck here ever since.
Yeah, we don't know what's happened with him since. And the other person here is the young lady who cooked all our meals for us while we were there. So that's it. Stop share.
Stop share.
So that's the story of Ethiopia.
Can I show the?
Yeah. So this is the chair or the neck rest. Okay, now you can see it again. So if you have it, unmute yourselves if you've got any questions.
So
Thanks, that was fantastic.
Okay, one at a time. Put your hand up. If you've got
Does
questions.
Steve let Ellie sit on the table?
I have a question.
Now wait. One at a time. Caroline, what was your question?
Does Steve let you sit on the chair?
Okay.
Not on this.
Let
one. She
you.
has her own.
We came back with two.
Let's can we have a demonstration, Steve?
Well, I don't think I'm covered by insurance.
Okay. Yeah, okay, Amy.
I have
Amy
a
has
question.
And then after Amy, Val.
Was that a naked person standing on an animal? And if so, what was that about?
Oh,
the
that's
last
a very
picture.
interesting story, because apparently it's very rare to see, and we were very lucky. To see her. Okay, so there's a ceremony. Before a man can marry, he has to own enough property. And what's property? It's cows. In that area, you have to have cows. I can't remember whether it's just one cow or several cows. Once you've got that, you're then able to marry. But before you do, you have to show how healthy you are. And can we go back to the? Can you go back to the? Let me go back to it maybe. And oh, wait a minute. No, it's this. Let me.
Yes. Okay.
Leave me. Is that going to work? Oh, it's not going to work.
You're trying to get back to that photograph.
Yeah. Okay. I can't get back to it.
Oh.
So what he has to do
It's seared in my mind. Don't worry about it.
That's the one thing you noticed in the whole presentation, Amy.
So
I'm shocked of myself. Yeah.
he has a special ceremony called jumping the balls. They bring a number of balls together, standing side by side, and he has to run and jump across them as quickly as he can. And then when he's done it over, I don't know, 7 or 8, he had another cow, and he had to go over again, and he keeps going until he see how many cows he can jump across, and that shows how healthy he is. And he has to do it naked, apparently. And once he's done that, then he's allowed to marry. So that's the story.
But that was in the South.
Steve and Ellie.
Yeah.
Do you remember that there was the women dancing before that? This is Jill. The women dancing, and they were beating each other and opening up their backs. And yeah, that was kind of impressive to try to show how wonderful they as women were worthy of a man.
Yeah, that's right. But that was all in the second half of the trip. We'll have to do another presentation for that. Okay, I think Steve's found it.
Just a minute.
What do you mean by opening up their backs? I don't understand.
Slashing.
They were being whipped,
drawing blood.
They were pouring blood out of their backs.
Oh my God!
And that was the same time as the jumping over the bulls.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That because they beat them? Is that because their husbands are going to beat them? I don't understand.
No.
It was supposed to be
not at all. They were showing what model women they were, that they could tolerate it.
Yeah.
So they'd be able to do all the schlepping. How strong they are. I told you, you saw women doing all the schlepping the whole time. You know, they don't have, for the most part, they don't have water. They have to go and bring water. The only time we ever saw men bringing water was when they'd established a business and they were selling the water. But the water that people were bringing to their own homes was all brought by women. Okay, Steve finally managed to get that slide back.
Yeah. So here,
you're talking about the.
Yeah. So here we've got So he has to run over, they were all the women. There's no women in this picture, but they had sticks, and they're just sort of beating back and forth across their backs. It was quite. But I don't know how much he's put on for the tourists, because while we were watching, I noticed there were 2 men standing off to the side in full native dress, and they're talking about something on their cell phone, which looked very anonymous.
Anonymous?
Not anonymous. Suspicious.
Yeah. We don't know. Anyway, any questions about the Jewish bit of the trip?
Yeah, okay. And there were various places where they were dancing. I remember Ellie dancing with them, Judy dancing with them. Yes.
It was fun. It was fun. Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah. Okay. Stop share. Any other questions? Oh, Val had a question. Val, and then Lauren. Val and then Lauren.
You showed the picture of the churches. Do they know how they were built underground? I mean, they're sort of built into a big hole. Do they know?
Down into the bedrock.
They dug them. If I can go back. Let's go back to those slides.
Yeah, it is a.
It shouldn't have gone out of.
It's a really quite awesome scene. Hold on. Steve's trying to get back to that picture.
Okay.
Almost there. There you go.
Yeah.
This is the one you mean?
Yeah. Okay. This one is called St. George's. Yes. St. George. They dug down. These are all they dug down. Here, this one you can see they dug into the cliff base. So this one is the top of this one. You can see they dug down into there.
Yeah, we approached along this path here.
Yeah, and then you've got this. You can't see here. I think the steps down were at the back here.
You see, in those days they built to last.
Wow.
And here again, you can see there's they've just built down into the rock. I believe it's the only example of this kind of building anywhere in the world. And this one here.
What kind of rock is it?
I don't know. It's not soft rock. I mean, this has lasted what, 1300, 1400 years. Now this one at the
It
bottom
looks
right,
like clay.
it's not clay. It's much harder.
Hmm.
Much harder.
I'm
And if it
sure.
was clay,
Stephen-
their huts are made of clay and they get damaged every year. So if you look here where you've got the
Stephen,
doorway-
Ellie,
Yeah.
it's Jill again. I just wanted to mention why they're there. If you remember, the Christian church was very big in making the aliyah to Jerusalem. And they used to visit every year. And then the history was created that it was too dangerous to go to Jerusalem every year. So the king decided that he would create his own Jerusalem. And this is why the source of why the churches are there, to recreate Jerusalem. And someone will have to look it up. It is in some way connected to the Ethiopian church here in Jerusalem, the actual church.
Okay.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure the information is all there.
Yeah.
Google it.
So if you see this entranceway here, I think that's actually where we were here,
Shows this, Judy.
and this was inside it. And it's all carpeted, which as Ellie said, you take your shoes off at the inside, then you walk on this, and you wonder how many hundreds of thousands of feet have trodden on this carpet before you, because I don't doubt that it gets cleaned very often.
Right. Yeah.
I have a
Okay,
question.
yeah. No, 8 minutes. Yes. Yes. Lauren, you were next. Lauren.
Okay. Yes, Ellie and Steve, I wanted to ask you, do you know how many people are waiting today to come that are like registered there?
No, I've got no
I
idea.
know
No
there
idea.
are people waiting because people keep coming and coming.
Because
Yeah.
the people who've
I
come
think
have all got relatives, haven't they?
Yeah. I understand that most of them are Flashmora,
Yeah.
not the bit of Israel.
Yeah. That's what we've been told. Yeah, but how many? I've got no idea.
It's interesting as well, the story of why they converted. Apparently a priest came along to Ethiopia from Europe. I can't remember where in Europe, in the late 19th century, met these people, realized that they're Jews, and said, "You're the only Jews left in the world. All the other Jews in the rest of the world have disappeared. You're the only ones. And if you convert to Christianity, convert to Christianity and be with the rest of us. And then you'll get land rights, you'll get all sorts of things." So a lot of them
Typical
converted.
church. Typical church.
What?
Sorry?
Typical church.
Oh,
I mean, why
typical
did
church.
you
Yeah.
Missionaries, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very surprising that they didn't all convert. There were lots of pressures. They weren't allowed to own land unless they converted. No.
Any more questions?
Yes, about that church you went into. Were there like steps down into the pit? Like
You
that
know
you
what, I
would
was
have to
thinking
go
about-
down.
I was thinking about that, and I don't actually remember. Judy, do you remember? Jill, do you remember?
Yeah. What?
You remember?
Well,
Oh,
yeah.
I
there
didn't
are,
hear the question.
You can't see them here, but there were.
How do you get down to to get into the church?
There were steps down, and they're actually, it wasn't there. It was at the back somewhere, I think. And there are paths in between.
Yeah, we
Do you
got
remember, Jill?
there. We didn't fly
We didn't jump.
and we
That
didn't
was
jump.
that was my assumption, that you didn't jump or use parachutes. Yeah.
Well, I've got lots of pictures showing how it's actually on different paths between the churches. I think actually No, it might have not been. Maybe we didn't go down into this one. You see, there are passageways.
Yeah.
And I think there are places where you go through, and they're all linked together through the rock.
Amazing
And,
sight. Amazing.
yeah. It's an amazing place.
Yeah.
A very good place to start seeing what it's like in Ethiopia. There were lots and lots of kids all dressed up because they all come here for celebrations, all dressed in white with lots of colored bands on and all sorts of things. It was very nice. And in fact, you can see, in here, you see these are all women who are just
Huddled up.
against the wall, and this woman was peeping out.
Like she's not supposed to be looking
Yeah,
at us.
she wasn't supposed to be looking, but I caught her. The moment they see a camera, they cover themselves.
It's like the
Yeah.
any other questions?
Perhaps the churches were built below ground because 1400 years ago, just as Muslims were starting to build in the world, you could not have a building higher than a Muslim building. And so if they had the churches below ground, they would still not be higher than the Muslim building.
There weren't any Muslims in that area at the time. And these were being built around the time that Islam started. Now there's quite even now there isn't a very large Muslim population. There is a Muslim population, and we saw a number of mosques, and they're all built very high and very, to show to be higher than everything else in the area. But that's fairly recent. So that's not the reason. I don't think anyone knows the reason.
Anybody else got any questions, comments,
It's
remarks?
Jill again.
Criticism.
It's Jill again.
Jill.
Jill, yes.
I just want to mention Micha's Amuta is still functioning. It's called Sela,
All right.
and it's for Ethiopian Jews who made aliyah when they're in crisis. If there's been a fire or some other tragedy, and they are a very responsive Amuta. Just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to mention something. There's as you probably know, there's quite a large Ethiopian community here in Carmiel, and I was very interested to see that the clothes that I was considered think of just their Shabbat clothes, because every Shabbat I'll see lots and lots of women in those white outfits. It was very interesting to see a lot of non-Jewish women wearing it on their Shabbat. So I found that very, very interesting.
Yes, it's an
Well, I found
example
the whole
how
thing.
it's an example
I
how
don't wanna-
Jews pick up the culture of the surrounding area, just like the Jews in Poland with their black suits and their big black hats.
Yeah,
And look
with
at it
the
now.
tribal.
Yes. Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you again some other time. I'd like to invite. Oh, Judy, do you want to say anything? Judy, do you want to say anything? Judy?
No, I already texted what I wanted to say, and
Okay. Because
I wanna thank
Judy
you.
came back from the Ethiopian trip. Judy definitely got added value from the Ethiopian trip, didn't you, Judy?
pardon?
Definitely got added value from the Ethiopian trip, didn't you?
He's sitting
Well,
next to you.
You saw the picture where we were eating. Well, I saw exactly where the corner was where I approached Ellie and Steve. And at the time I said, I've been widowed for 16 years. I said, don't you know anybody? And they said, yes, we actually know somebody on our yishuv. And that's how I met this guy. That's how I met Trevor. And it's working. And it was as a result of that, I went on my own to the Ethiopian, and I saw that corner where I approached you. So yes,
So we'll always
but
remember
I was
that.
only there for the first half of the trip. And
Right.
it was so silly because I came back because I was teaching. That was so silly. I should have stayed and would have gained a lot more had I been with the tribes,
Yes, it was
but
fascinating.
it's okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's very
Okay.
special.
So thank you. It was lovely for everybody to join us, especially those who are not HOB people from all over the world. It's been fantastic to see you all. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you all again.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys so
So
much for
it
putting this
wonderful.
together and inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Nice seeing all the Wuji.
Yeah, nice seeing the
Is
Oh
that
my
what-
Oh yeah,
God,
and could the
yes.
committee members stay behind?
Oh yeah,
Close
committee
off that
members stay
8
behind,
till 9.
please. Committee members stay behind, please. Okay.
Hi, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Ellie. This was
Bye.
great. Thanks for the station.
Right.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.